Access big savings every day, all in the Kroger app.
Get fresh Purdue boneless chicken breasts for $3.49 a pound. Then find low prices on thousands of items like sparkling ice water, Kroger brand chips, and more, all with your card.
Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details. Access big savings every day, all in the Kroger app.
Get fresh Purdue boneless chicken breasts for $3.49 a pound. Then find low prices on thousands of items like sparkling ice water, Kroger brand chips, and more, all with your card.
Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to Rethreading Madness.
When I've never been further, knowing what the hell I'm gonna do. When I can't seem to find my way under or over or through.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and today I have Danielle Ryan with me. She has a really popular YouTube program that she does on coaching scams, and I really wanted her to come and talk with us because, as you know, we do a lot of work around therapy, abuse, and exploitation on this program, and what we're finding is that therapists, when they lose their license, often will become coaches because they don't need a license, but maybe they do. Danielle, tell us who you are.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. As Bernadine mentioned, my name's Danielle. I am a content creator based here in Vancouver as well. And I actually started my journey as a business owner about 7 years ago now, when I decided to quit my job and open a yoga studio in Ontario. And in that time, I actually had hired a business coach. And it was a whole situation in itself where I essentially ended up losing close to $5,000 to this person who promised me one thing and delivered something else, which I'm sure we can get into later. But flash forward a few years, I ended up moving out here to the West Coast, and I started this YouTube channel where I was actually sharing my experience as a business owner, and on a bit of a whim decided to recount that story of hiring this coach and having a negative experience. And it seemed to really resonate with people. And from that point on, I started getting people reaching out to me, not just about business coaches, but about life coaches, spiritual coaches, all different sorts of shady behavior that was happening in the coaching space specifically. And so I really kind of latched onto that and started investigating it further. And now we're another 2 years along the road, and it's just wild what I've learned in that time. And so I have my own business now that I run, and then I also have this YouTube channel, and I'm just really excited to get into the conversation with you today.
Can you tell us how coaches are trained? Do they have to have training to call themselves a coach?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the coaching industry itself, I would say, operates in a largely or predominantly gray area. So there is no sort of governing body for the coaching industry, which essentially means that anyone could wake up on any given day and just decide to slap the title of coach on themselves, regardless of whether or not they have any formal education or not. So while training programs do exist, they aren't mandated or mandatory by any means.
So if you're seeing a coach, what is their job? What are they supposed to do?
I think if we look at the traditional definition of coaching, a coach should be someone who asks very powerful questions, pointed questions, in an effort to try and guide you to discovering your own answers. So typically you would hire a coach if you have a specific goal in mind that you want assistance in helping to achieve. So I know, like, in my own experience, I started my business with no experience, and I just wanted someone that was going to kind of guide me on how to make it a successful venture. And so I think in the context of any type of coaching, it's typically like I'm facing this particular challenge and I just want someone that's going to, ask me those questions to help me figure out how to get to where I want to be.
Yeah, that's kind of my idea when I think about coaching and the times that I've thought about maybe hiring a coach. I never did, but I always felt that I would be interacting with somebody who knew the path and was well versed in that path and knew exactly all the steps I needed to take to get where I needed to be. Is that kind of what a coach should be? Is that kind of the same thing you said?
Exactly. I think that sometimes there can be a little bit of confusion, and this is amongst coaches themselves or people outside the coaching industry. No one really seems to understand truly whether or not a coach is supposed to like tell you what to do per se. Um, and I think, again, if we look at like the formal definition, the role of a coach isn't necessarily to say, follow step 1, step 2, step 3, so much as to just ask you what you think is the right next step and how that would feel. And I think that I mention this because it creates this sort of gray area where, because no one's really sure what credentials the coach should have or what specific they're supposed to help us with, then when we get into these programs, we pay these people and we don't get results. Well, then was it really my responsibility as the coach to teach you how to do that anyway? It makes the whole situation very, very murky because it is quite unclear.
Mm-hmm. Is there a governing body for coaches? Is there a place that people go to get trained or become registered coaches like we have for therapists?
For sure. So this is an interesting question because depending who you ask, you might get a different answer. There are particular governing bodies, we can call them very loosely, that do exist. So one that is quite well known is the International Coaching Federation, or the ICF. And so essentially they effort to be a governing body wherein they have like a code of ethics. They create guidelines for what coaching programs need to include or not include and that sort of thing. But there is, again, no real official governing body that says, like, if you want to be a life coach, you have to be trained through the ICF. So, I mean, when I first opened my yoga studio, I actually, keep in mind, I was 26 years old at the time. I thought, why don't I become a life coach? And so I went on udemy.com and paid like $13 for a quote unquote certification that was not ICF certified. But I got a certificate at the end that said I was a certified life coach. And so, yes, there's a governing body, but there's no actual enforcement in terms of like from the actual government. It's just kind of like this large organization that says they're in charge. But at the end of the day, anyone can still call themselves a coach.
So just so that I'm clear, you paid $13 and got a certificate. Did you have any training or were you vetted? Did you have to prove that you were a life coach?
Yeah, so it was like a stereotypical online course. Like, I think there was like 8 hours worth of modules that you would watch. There was homework you would submit, but in retrospect, it's like, who's actually reviewing that material? There was no mandatory amount of hours I needed to complete to prove that I had the skill set.
Okay.
I could have just as easily logged on and clicked next till I got to the end of the program.
Right, exactly. So this ICF, are they able to hold coaches accountable if they don't follow the ethical guidelines?
In a sense, sure. So let's say I got a certification through an ICF accredited institution, and 6 months down the line, a client reports me to the ICF for acting unethically. The ICF might then strip my credentials, but again, because they don't actually have any authority, there's nothing stopping me from still continuing to call myself just a regular coach and advertise my services as such.
And is that their only penalty, is to strip your certificate from you?
I believe so. Yeah, it would be you lose your ICF certification, but again, it doesn't really hold any weight in the first place.
Right. And that's kind of where we're at with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of therapists and counselors in BC who may or may not be trained, but are a part of a professional association that is a nonprofit organization, whether it's an association or a society. And when a complaint comes forward, and I know this personally, you send in a complaint and the person you're complaining about resigns their membership, the investigative file is just closed. That's it. And the person goes on continuing to do therapy because they can. There is no regulation in the province of BC that somebody can't call themselves a therapist or a counselor if they haven't been trained and certified as such. So what kind of coaches are there? Like in terms of, the types of coaches?
Literally anything you could absolutely imagine. There are relationship coaches, divorce coaches, life coaches, business coaches, career coaches. You want to pick any obscure thing, a pregnancy coach, like it doesn't matter. You come up with a word, slap the title coach next to it, it probably exists.
That's so, and you've been doing your YouTube program. Sorry, I think, is that what you call it? A YouTube program?
My YouTube channel. I've been at it
YouTube
since
channel.
2022, so almost 3 years now.
3 years. And so I'm sure that you've heard exactly that there's all different kinds of coaches. So what's the difference between a coach and a mentor?
For sure. Again, I think it comes back to that initial definition of the coach being someone that's just supposed to ask you those powerful questions, help you kind of navigate things on your own. I would refer to them more as like a support in terms of like they're kind of guiding you, but they're not necessarily telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to something like mentorship, that's when you would typically be seeking out someone who has that direct experience related to whatever you're trying to accomplish. And they're more likely to actually show you, step one, you should do this, step two, you should do this. And then also maybe combining a little bit of that coaching. So it's
Right.
slightly more hands-on, I would say.
Right. And clearly there are also mental health coaches.
Yes. Oh, dear God, yes.
So tell me about mental health coaches, because that's what we deal with here. We deal with mental health. So
For sure. So, mental health coaching, I think, is probably one of the most fascinating ones that I've seen, specifically in that I think a lot of the times it kind of, again, gets really blurry because these people are essentially, in many cases, I won't say all, but many mental health coaches are sort of cosplaying, I would say, as an actual mental health professional. So whether that's a therapist, whether that's a psychologist, whatever.
mm-hmm.
And they're essentially, from the ones that I, again, have looked at, seem to be essentially wanting to lead people under the idea that, like, I have the skills to help you overcome, again, insert issue here, whether it's PTSD, it's some other kind of trauma, it's some kind of ADHD, mental health disorder, whatever. Typically it comes from the lens of like, I have it, I overcame it, now I can help you. And so they use that to try and convince you that they can help you solve whatever problem you're facing, regardless of whether or not they do actually have the credentials or understanding to be able to do so.
Mm-hmm. Is there any mechanism within the field, which when I say that sounds so scattered, I can't imagine that your answer is going to be yes, that that allows people who are entertaining the idea of using a coach that they can go to and sort of find out whether or not they should take this kind of coach or that kind of coach, or if coaching is for them, or is there anything like that?
Yeah, like again, I guess the ICF tries to have those resources. Like they have blog posts and whatever that kind of go over this is when you should hire a coach, this is when you shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like one specific database, I guess not.
Okay.
But I think like there again, because so many people are having these conversations now, particularly those who have been burned by the industry, there is a lot of information available freely online. Like if you just search coaching scam, I'm sure you will get tons of articles, Reddit posts, YouTube videos, etc.
And is there any review board or place that somebody can go to and see whether or not somebody they're thinking of going to has been complained about or has already committed a scam of some kind?
Not formally, but I would say I always encourage people to search like first name, last name Reddit and see if anyone has posted there, because that's one place that people can do so anonymously. So it's often quite insightful. And then also like Trustpilot, Better Business Bureau, a lot of larger name coaches have records there of things
All
like
right.
that.
So we're going to take a little break, but when we come back, we're going to talk some more with Danielle about coaching scams and how we can figure out who's who and what's what and what are the red flags. So we'll be right back, folks.
And they flow through my heart, but I don't know where they go. Still I find a friend for all time, whispering to me in my mind. Oh, whispering wind, take me home tonight. Everything's gonna be alright. Sometimes the world is on your side, other times it's not to say. Is there someone who will take all the blame? Is she there in my mind? Is she there in my mind? Take me home tonight. Oh, whispering wind, tell me everything's gonna be alright. After month, year after year, I don't know where the time goes. Time after time, reasons and rhyme, seasons come and they go. Oh, whispering wind, take me home tonight. Gonna be alright. I say, oh, whispering wind, take me home tonight. Oh, whispering wind, tell me everything. Tell me everything. Tell me everything's gonna be alright.
Hi folks, this is Steve Ferguson, your 21st century schizoid man, and I'm the host of Prog Rock Alley, inviting you to come down and listen to our show every week at Monday, 1 a.m., the very end of the weekend. We will be looking at all forms of progressive rock. I'm talking about space rock, art rock, math rock, fusion jazz. You want it? I got it. Just name it, I'll play it. We'll see you again. That's here on CFRO 100.5 Co-op Radio, Monday mornings, 1 a.m.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, speaking with Danielle Ryan, who has a YouTube channel on coaching scams. So Danielle, thank you for doing this with us. It's a very important topic, and I suspect a lot of people don't know about it unless you've experienced it. Am I right?
Oh, 100%. I think when I think back to my own experience, I look at the stories that I've been told by individuals that watch my content. A lot of the time, you get snarky comments on YouTube, just like anywhere on the internet. Why would anybody be stupid enough to fall for this? And I think that people tend to really not understand the vulnerability that goes into, like, first of all, why people fall for these coaching scams, but also the fact that, like, the solutions that are being presented to you are so enticing that there is no possible way that you would even think to register that it could potentially be a scam until you give your money and end up recognizing through going through it that it's not what it appears to be.
Mm-hmm. So if we go back to mental health coaching, you mentioned that it's particularly dangerous. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the most common things that I've seen in the content that I've looked at specifically on my channel is a lot of these mental health coaches claiming to help you heal your trauma or cure your trauma, which obviously I think at face value people might listening to this might be able to understand why that is incredibly dangerous. But if we look back at our previous conversation and we think about how we're operating within an unregulated industry, there isn't really a governing body that's going to reprimand people for not following any kind of ethical boundaries. And if we take that sort of environment and match it with these people with no skill set, no credential, no education in many cases, offering to help you heal your trauma, aka put you in a situation where we're likely going to unearth previous experiences you've been through without the proper sort of safeguards in place, I guess you could say, I think that it just creates an environment in which really bad things can happen. And I mean, I've discussed one-on-one, there's a number of interviews on my channel with people who have been re-traumatized from hiring coaches who claim to be able to help them with their PTSD or whatever kind of mental health issues they were facing. And then also, I think it can sometimes, in certain cases, foster a codependent relationship because you're coming into this coaching relationship with this mental health coach who promises to be able to help you overcome whatever traumatic instances you face in your lifetime. Maybe you don't have access to other people or relationships in your life that have been supportive with that specific situation that you're dealing with. And now this coach comes in and leverages that, essentially acting as a friend or a confidant, again, because those ethical boundaries aren't super clear. But in many cases are often doing that for their own financial gain. So it really is just this wild mix of someone being in a really vulnerable position, finding a mental health coach who is promising to be able to help heal them, giving them money in exchange for that service, and then ending up in this very dependent relationship where the only way they're going to, quote unquote, benefit from it is to continue to give them more and more money.
And to continue to be dependent on them.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, that is a goal of therapy, and we lose sight of that. And I know this isn't therapy, but often it's a lost thing in that you go to therapy and your counselor's job is to work themselves out of a job. That's what they should be doing. And it sounds like, well, we know some counselors don't do that. And it sounds like some mental health coaches are also not doing that. There are some crossovers there that pertain to therapy, abuse, and exploitation, like creating the dependency, certainly having the other one that I keep thinking must be here just because of what that other person said, saying, why would people be taken in like this, is that people go into therapy, and I would imagine coaching, not knowing what that process is. They are told, go to therapy. You need to see a therapist. Go, trust the therapist. Say whatever you need to say. And if you're not telling them, you're not trusting them enough, you're not doing your work, you're not working hard enough. And so people go sort of blinded, or not blinded, but blind to the process, or what to expect, or what should or shouldn't happen. We don't know the ethical guidelines for the therapist. They know them. And a good therapist is going to say to their client, this is the ethical guideline here. And a bad therapist is going to say, we don't need to worry about that. We can transgress that. It's all okay. And so what you're describing to me is is very similar to what we see happening with abusive therapists.
100%. And I think it's almost exacerbated in coaching specifically, again, because there is that lack of regulation and many coaches don't have a certification or they've never even read through a code of ethics or know what that even is to then have something to uphold their behavior to, because they don't know. So they're just like the blind leading the blind. I did this thing to overcome my trauma, whatever, and now I'm just going to teach you what I did, even if it's not necessarily safe for you.
Yes. And disregarding the fact that everybody's healing process is different and the variables that go into that are completely different for everybody. It's just not a one size fits all for anybody.
Exactly.
And I just want to make it clear to people that therapists and counselors can call themselves a therapist or counselor without any training as well. So just as they can become coaches, you can call yourself a therapist and a counselor, throw up a shingle, charge $150, $200 and have people coming to see you in exactly the same way. And they may or may not be registered with a professional association. If they had no training, they may not be vetted, be able to succeed in that vetting and be a member of a professional mental health association, but they can still call themselves a counselor and a therapist. So Danielle, what should people look at think about when they're hiring a coach?
Yeah, I think step number one is to really consider why it is you want to hire a coach. Again, if we look back at or think back to the initial conversation here, I think that a lot of people don't understand what coaching is. Even coaches, some coaches don't understand what coaching is. So really asking yourself, what is the goal here that I'm trying to achieve or accomplish? And is a coach going to be the best professional, I say that word loosely, to help me get to where I'm trying to be? And so if we've done that sort of self-reflection and we've recognized, yes, I think that coaching is the right choice for me, I would say to just be mindful in terms of where you're seeking that support. So maybe not just clicking on the first ad that you see on your Facebook or Instagram, and doing a little bit of research into who it is you're trying to hire. So again, I always recommend that you seek out reviews online. I would also recommend you consult other people in your real life to see their perspective. I know for me, I've been saved from a number of investments by simply just showing my partner like, hey, I'm thinking about hiring a person to help me with XYZ. And he's like, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea. So that's a simple solution. But looking at pricing, a lot of these, especially in the coaching space, a lot of them charge upwards of thousands and thousands of dollars for their services. So if that's the case, perhaps reconsidering or finding a lower cost option, looking at what it is they're promising to help you with and understanding that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Remembering that coaches are not here to diagnose you. They're not here to treat trauma. They're not here to replace the help of a professional. And so if they say that they can or do any of those things, that they might be operating unethically. And I guess really just looking for transparency. So reading through their terms of service, seeing if they offer things like a free consultation, refunds, that sort of thing. And don't be afraid to just directly reach out to these people and ask questions, because if someone's being vague or they're dodging the answers to things that you want to know about, that's probably a red flag as well.
Right. One of the things that comes to mind as you're talking is that because we know therapists who've lost their license to practice can often turn to coaching and continue on working. There's the other thing that people can do is search online to see whether or not that person has been disciplined by any of the colleges or regulatory boards or licensing boards or associations. Even in the association, one of the associations here now, if somebody is a member and they have a complaint against them and they resign in the middle of that investigation, that is noted on the website. And I think it's a little covert in some ways, because the regular average person out there will look and will see that and not necessarily know what that means. But for somebody like me, I know when I see somebody resigned in the middle of an investigation that they did something pretty bad. And so it's that they can also go there just to kind of root out if somebody has been a therapist before and lost their license. We need
Yes,
to just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to reiterate that explicitly asking people for their credentials and for their background and paying attention to the response you get there. So if I'm asking you, you know, what's your experience as a mental health coach, and the person's kind of skirting around that answer, that's definitely a time for you to go and explore what's available freely online about these people.
Mm-hmm. I've actually heard of a therapist who told their client that they had been a psychotherapist, but they didn't agree with the way that psychotherapy was being regulated. And so they decided to give up their license and become a coach. And of course, that's like tons of red flags flapping in your face at that point, only if you know what you're looking at and what you're hearing. It may sound to somebody else as if the person is being an altruistic therapist wanting to do what's best for their client, etc. We need to just take a little break, folks, but we'll be right back.
Tanuyap. Quiget Yuans Queensna. Hi, everybody. My name is Quiget Yuans. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation and the Yagalanas clan of the Haida Nation. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We live, work, play, and broadcast from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
Maybe you're feeling it coming. Maybe it's nothing at all. Sometimes change come and pick you up just when you start to fall. Sometimes it's too familiar and you just gotta run. Or you can find what you think you need to do what must be done. But wherever you run, wherever you roam, every road is leading you home. Whatever may come, whatever the load, every road leads home. All those years of choices carry my pride and my shame. There is something lost for every freedom gained. Some days lie before you like a battle to be won. You may feel like you're
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, speaking with Danielle Ryan about coaching scams. So Danielle, you were talking about sort of, how to kind of check out a coach before going in to see them and some of the things to think about. Can you tell us some of the things that you've heard of and or have presented on your YouTube channel about things that have happened to people? How does this play out?
Absolutely. So I've been fortunate enough now at this point to have sat down face to face with close to 50 people, I think, who were either victims of a coaching scam, former coaches themselves, or just observers of the industry. And it's been pretty wild and honestly quite heartbreaking to hear some of these stories. In a lot of the circumstances, regardless of what type of coaching it is, spiritual, life coaching, mental health, business, whatever, I think one of the most common, or not just one, many of the most common threads amongst those stories is the tens of thousands of dollars people have lost to getting duped by a coach, but also the emotional and psychological harm that has resulted from those experiences. And I mean, I can speak to this from my own coaching experience, the amount of shame and self-blame that gets placed for not having that level of awareness that we spoke to earlier of realizing or recognizing the scam before it took place and just having to come to terms with the manipulative tactics that were used in order to get you to hand over your money. I mean, I spoke to a woman last week, her interview was just published, who was struggling with bipolar disorder and had been in and out of the psych ward. And I share this story. She shared this story openly on the channel, so I'm not doxing her by any means, but she had been in and out of the psych ward while she was working with a coach who had actually re-traumatized her through their coaching relationship and had asked to end the coaching program and said, I'm obviously not in a good place psychologically. I was hoping we could cut the relationship here and get refunded for services not rendered. And the coach essentially just ghosted her and went in. They were part of a spiritual community together. And she went into that community and basically turned everyone against the individual who was the victim here. And it's just hearing stories like that really just opens my eyes to just how much nonsense is happening in this space. Specifically, I believe because there is no repercussions. So this coach can act in this way. She can take this person's money and turn her whole community against her, and there's no recourse. She can now carry on and find a new victim. So it's really just so heartbreaking to have to hear story after story after story of these people who just wanted to do something better for themselves and ended up in a worse off position than where they started.
No kidding. And this was a mental health coach?
This was so she called herself like a spiritual healing mentor.
Oh, okay. Oh, dear. That sounds so much like therapy, abuse, and exploitation. And the grooming that includes making somebody dependent and love bombing them and getting them to trust them or demanding trust, or and then the exploitation, which in this case seems mostly financial as far as I can tell, although we can talk about that in a bit. And then what happens to people when they're discarded by these abusive therapists who can no longer exploit them? Once that happens, they discard them, and that the harm that's done is catastrophic. And I don't think people understand the level of that damage and the deep damage that can happen to people. And even the stuff where, the person is being re-traumatized by the community around that person, and they are supporting the spiritual healer and not the client that's been harmed. We see that happening in the mental health industry all the time, where the industry itself sort of is still in many ways enabling and protecting the offenders, the abusive therapists. And sometimes it's out of naivete and not understanding what they're looking at or not being trained in what they're looking at. but other times it is because they have their own skin in the game and may have exploited their own clients as well. And until we get to the place where this is on board and on the table, I should say, and being looked at well, we're not going to really know why people do the things that they're doing. But certainly what you described with this client is happening in therapy abuse and exploitation as well.
I actually have a question for you.
Yes.
And this is just this conversation about the parallels we're seeing here. I would be curious. I know from the conversations I've had, a common theme is, you invest in one coach, you have a negative relationship. And again, because of the shame and the guilt that's associated with that, a lot of these people will assume like, oh, it was my fault. I just made a bad choice in choosing who my coach was going to be. Maybe I'll hire somebody else and they're going to, be the one that helps me solve this problem. Is that something that you see in therapy exploitation, wherein I have a negative experience with the therapist? So I think, oh, well, maybe it was just that guy and I just need to go find somebody else.
Actually, it is, but it's slightly different in that mental health consumers, people who live with mental health challenges, are told that by the world, by society. They're told, go and see a therapist. And if it doesn't work, it's your fault. The mental health industry is also kind of set up to make it the client's fault. You didn't work hard enough. You weren't able to trust well enough. You weren't able to open up. You weren't willing to do the homework I gave you. You weren't, they have a lot of ways that they blame the client. So it may be an internal thing, and certainly shame and guilt are huge because consider a trauma survivor going to see an abusive therapist unknowingly, being exploited, and we can add sexualized trauma and being sexually exploited. When they finally realize what has gone on and how they've been duped, they have to also
unpack all of that.
Well, not just unpack it, but they have to recognize on some level they participated in their own victimization, because they didn't know what was going on. They were told, this is fine, this is what you need to do. Some therapists call it treatment. You have to have sex with me because I'll heal you. And so we're taught to believe the therapist. We're taught not to necessarily question a therapist or question what they're doing. And if you have a good therapist, they're going to teach you ethical guidelines properly. If you have a bad therapist, they're going to teach you ethical guidelines that fit how they want to exploit you. And so because we're groomed literally in society to go and trust the therapist is there to help us, we put our critical thinking aside to get that help and do the work. And so shame becomes a big part of it.
Yeah. And I think that
never their fault. And I just want to clearly say that after saying all of that, it is never the client's fault for what a therapist did. It's always 100% their fault, no matter what.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think that those group environments particularly can be incredibly dangerous. And I know in coaching, it's super popular to have, memberships, group programs, that kind of thing. And I was actually just reading a story yesterday for YouTube where this woman was talking about, she was in like a manifestation coaching program and she wasn't getting results after paying this coach. And so she just started, asking questions in this Facebook group. Why isn't XYZ working? And she started to notice that the group leader was deleting any comments that were either questioning the methods or simply just statements that it wasn't working, were being removed from the group. And I think any kind of environment, whether it's in a professional mental health setting or coaching, wherein you're basically being told, think what I tell you to think and do as I tell you to do, is incredibly, incredibly dangerous and a very slippery slope too, because if everyone around you is believing the same things that you're all being told to believe, it's like cult-like behavior. And I think it's very hard to see your way out of that.
It is very hard to see, especially if everybody around you is normalizing it. It's very hard to find your own feet and stand on them and say, no, this is what I'm seeing, and stand in that. It's difficult, especially if what you have is in front of you a spiritual healing mentor.
Exactly.
I mean, that sounds pretty cool, like great. I mean, I would have no idea how to do spiritual healing. So I would be inclined to, if that's what I felt I needed, to believe whatever that person is telling me, because it seems so far beyond anything I know. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of stories you hear?
For sure. I mean, it's a wide array, as I've mentioned, of all different things. One particular story is coming to mind right now of a woman who she was autistic and struggled a lot with building personal relationships in her life. So she had just gone through losing some close relatives and was struggling a little bit mentally. And so she ended up reaching out to a relationship coach in hopes of learning how to foster deeper connections in her personal life. And so, long story short, essentially what happened was this relationship coach, rather than teaching her the actual skills and techniques to be able to build other relationships beyond the coaching relationship, essentially just fostered a codependent relationship with the client, wherein the client continued to pay her upwards of tens of thousands of dollars. She had just received an inheritance from the relative that had passed away. And the whole story was just incredibly tragic and heartbreaking because essentially this coach convinced her, just keep paying me and I will help you solve this problem. And once again, same situation I've heard time and time again. She's giving her thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to essentially pay for the friendship of this coach. And once the money ran out, the friendship ran out as well. And so it's just, I feel like I created this platform so people could feel seen and heard in their experience. But the more and more people I talk to, the more I start to recognize that it's just all too common. I can replace your story with my story with her story. And at the end of the day, it all follows sort of the same framework and the same principles. And it's really just so heartbreaking to bear witness to.
In therapy abuse and exploitation, we call that the playbook because we also have the same thing, the same story over and over and over, and with the same grooming techniques, the same kinds of exploitation, and the same retaliation in the termination phase where they are working to silence or discredit their victims. In fact, the parallels between coaching, scams, and therapy abuse and exploitation are so close that I'm having a hard time separating them. Can you tell us a little bit about what happens to people? What's a common outcome for people who've gone through this?
For sure. Obviously, a lot of heartache, a lot of confusion. I think many people end their coaching relationships and are unsure of what to do next. I think that aside from the significant financial loss that many people experience, I mean, I've spoken with people with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt from coaching programs. But beyond that, really just learning how to recover. So many people end up in these situations where they've been so dependent on this other person for so long that they've kind of lost sight of themselves and what's important to them, especially those in those group environments, again, where we're being taught what to think and what to say and how to feel about things. When we extract ourselves from those situations, well, what is really important to me? What do I actually value? How am I supposed to function in a world outside of the coaching bubble that I've lived in for, in many cases, years and years and years? And so I think a lot of the times it really just comes down to people then seeking out alternative resources and supports. In some cases, that is actually therapy or, support groups and other things that exist online now. To try and find their footing, figure out who they are beyond or who they used to be before all of this happened.
Can I just go through some of the well-known common outcomes for therapy abuse and exploited clients, and just see whether or not you've heard of these in the in the coaching environment as well.
For sure.
What about self-harm?
In some cases, yes.
Okay. Suicide or suicide idea. Oh, sorry. Hold on one second. I don't know what happened to my throat. It just went weird. Hold on. My God. What about suicide or a suicidal ideation?
Absolutely.
Just so we know, in therapy abuse and exploitation, suicidal ideation, attempting or committing suicide is many, many, many times greater in this population, the therapy abuse and exploitation victim population, than any other victim group. So what about distrust? What about their ability to trust?
Absolutely. I would say that's one of the biggest
Yeah.
ones because, again, after you lose all that money, you lose all that time, it's really difficult for you to think, who actually does have my best interests in mind
Yeah.
in terms of any service provider that you hire from there
Yeah,
on.
exactly. And how could I have done this? And shame, we talked about that. What about anxiety?
Definitely. And I think that ties into the distrust of,
Mhm.
and the shame and the guilt
Oh yeah.
of so many anxious feelings around like, how could I have been so stupid? How could I have not seen it? But also, again, who am I beyond this? And
Yeah.
how do I figure that out?
And going from a relationship where you're dependent on that person to being set afloat, basically
Exactly.
trying to figure out how to do all that again. Panic attacks,
Yep.
CPTSD,
Definitely.
Stockholm syndrome. Do I need to explain that? Maybe I do for my listeners. Stockholm syndrome is a syndrome which where the victim actually protects the offender and will work to make sure they're okay. And we see that with people in therapy, abuse, and exploitation before they've kind of figured out what happened to them. They are set up and groomed to, in fact, protect their abusive therapist. So I don't know whether or not that happens in coaching.
I can assure you this is alive and well based
Okay.
on the comment section of my YouTube channel.
Right. Okay. Dysregulation, and that's kind of not quite anxiety or panic attacks. It's more just not being able to regulate your own emotional content for yourself. And so you're just unable to function. So you're at risk of losing your job, your friends, your house, your livelihood, your children, because you can't cope.
Absolutely. I actually just spoke with a woman. This interview hasn't been published yet, but a woman whose partner got, sucked into the coaching world so far to the point that they ended up separating. And now this isn't even a byproduct of like this particular woman being the victim of coaching, but because her partner became so deeply engrossed in the cult of coaching, she herself is now experiencing that dysregulation in the aftermath of that, trying to figure out how this even happened.
Right. So if I'm right, her partner was the one that engaged in the coach, and she is having a consequence to that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we find that with therapy, abuse, and exploitation as well, that we tend to think binary. We have a therapist and a client, and what is happening between the two of them. But in fact, the harm filters out to their family and friends and children and
Exactly.
partners, for sure. So tell people where they can find your podcast.
For sure. You can find me on YouTube. I publish videos every single week. It's Danielle Ryan everywhere on the internet. So I'm also on Instagram, TikTok, all of that good stuff.
Okay. So if you need to get a hold of Danielle, you can just Google her and you will be able to find her. I actually did it myself. It was quite easy to find you. Thank you. So thank you, Danielle. This has been very interesting. And I think it's an important topic that those two things that are happening in the world, coaching scams and therapy, abuse, and exploitation, the parallels are so consistent that we need to be in touch with each other to keep moving ahead and making sure these things are stopped so people can live their life.
For sure. Very valuable conversations to be had. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And that's it, folks. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it seems we're all running around in our own directions. Sometimes it seems we've forgotten which way to turn. Sometimes it seems all we see is the light of our own reflection, caught in the flame of the bridges we have burned. Guide us through it seems life's the jigsaw puzzle with one piece missing. Sometimes it seems we've all lost the rules to the game, and all we really want are magic wands to keep on wishing someone might remember us by name. There are angels who walk among us, helping, sharing, shining light. Precious angels here among us, guide us through. We'll walk with you, and everything will be alright. What if our wings are still folded? And what if we aren't quite ready to see? What if we've made mistakes along life's journey? Are there still a little bit of the angels in you and me? There are angels who walk among us, helping, sharing, shining light. Precious angels here among us, guide us through. We'll walk with you. Guide us through. We'll walk with you, and everything will be alright.
Vancouver Cooperative Radio is an innovative, non-profit community radio station with a mission to produce creative and engaging programming for communities whose voices are underrepresented in the mainstream media. We need your financial support to help us achieve this mission. By donating today, you will help us to continue to provide training and access to equipment for over 300 volunteers who produce 140 hours of original programming in over 10 languages. Our radio station is located in the heart of the downtown East Side, and since 1975, we have celebrated the rich cultural diversity of the Greater Vancouver area through our arts, music, and spoken word programming. Please support alternative, community-based radio. Donate today by visiting coopradio.org/donate or calling 604-684-8494. That's 604-684-8494.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and that's our show. My thanks to Danielle Ryan from Coaching Scams on YouTube for joining us today to help us understand how to protect ourselves when engaging with coaches, whether it is a business to mental health coach. Our music today was by Ulrich, Laron, and Wallace, and my thanks goes out to you for joining us today. Stay safe out there. You've just listened to Rethreading Madness, where we dare to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program, or want to share your story, or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.
When I've never been further, knowing what the hell I'm gonna do. When I can't seem to find my way under or over or through. Just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights, and it's alright. saying, baby, take it from me. It's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright.
Access big savings every day, all in the Kroger app.
Get fresh Purdue boneless chicken breasts for $3.49 a pound. Then find low prices on thousands of items like sparkling ice water, Kroger brand chips, and more, all with your card.
Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away, or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details. Access big savings every day, all in the Kroger app.
Get fresh Purdue boneless chicken breasts for $3.49 a pound. Then find low prices on thousands of items like sparkling ice water, Kroger brand chips, and more, all with your card.
Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away, or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details.